Every year, hundreds of women are found murdered or deceased with no name, no ID, and no one to claim them. They become known only by what they were found with: a tattoo, a shirt, a piece of jewelry. In death, unfortunately, they lose even the dignity of identity. Welcome to Tales Unknown. Here are 5 haunting Jane Doe mysteries. Smurfette Jane Doe. The reason they called her Smurfette Jane Doe is because that's all they had. She was found on a Tuesday afternoon, October 16th of 2012 in Houston, Texas. A driver had just happened to pull off the road near Fallbrook Church looking for a lost hubcap, but what he found instead gave him the shock of a lifetime. There, dumped next to the gravel road leading up to an oil field, was a black trash bag. It was torn open in parts, likely from animals, and curled inside it, like a child hiding from the world, was a human body. She was partially skeletonized, bones fragile and weather-worn, but the outfit she wore was hard to miss. A turquoise t-shirt with Smurfette on the front and the phrase, "He smurfs me. He smurfs me not." Beneath it, adult lingerie, pink underwear, and a black bra. That contrast of the innocence of a cartoon and the implication of exploitation added another sinister layer to the whole case. She was brought in, and so began the process of identifying who she really was and then hopefully discovering the truth behind what happened to her. The medical examiner estimated she'd been dead for at least 3 weeks, maybe longer, but likely she was killed sometime in September. It was a teenage girl, maybe 15 to 17 years old, who stood between 4'7" and 5 feet tall. She had a slender frame and was mixed race, probably African American and white. Her long curly brown hair had been tied back with a single bobby pin, and at some point in her life, she had dyed it purple. There was no ID, of course, no missing persons report, and no parents searching. Just a child dumped like that off a rural Texas road. But her body told a story, even if her name didn't. Her bones showed growth arrest lines, a sign of malnutrition or chronic illness during childhood. She also only had 22 ribs instead of the typical 24. Her skull had a pronounced overbite and a noticeable facial asymmetry, something that would have been visible during life. The Smurfette Jane Doe also had 3 dental fillings, which meant at one point someone had cared enough to get her treatment. But by the time she died, her teeth were decayed, her body weak, and she was likely trapped in a world no child should ever know. The evidence painted a brutal theory that she had been the victim of child trafficking. Her body was found in a known dumping ground just off a stretch of Walters Road that runs through a Houston corridor notorious for brothels and exploitation. Police believed she may have been trafficked, controlled, and eventually discarded when she was no longer useful, or maybe when she tried to escape. Beyond the obvious crime part of what makes this case so dark is that despite the nationwide press coverage, not one person ever came forward saying they recognized her. Nobody knew any teenage girl who matched her description that suddenly vanished in 2012. Forensic isotope analysis revealed she likely wasn't from Houston at all. The minerals in her bones suggested she came from further south, maybe San Antonio or Austin. Investigators even looked into connections across the U.S.-Mexico border, hoping she or her family might have been from there. They found nothing. They tried to trace where that Smurfette shirt came from, an unusual design with no clear retail origin. They cross-referenced her dental work, consulted missing persons reports nationwide. They actually ruled out at least 17 possible identities of known missing persons and never figured out who she really was. Eventually, they buried her in an unmarked grave in Harris County Cemetery. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children still lists her case as active, but more than a decade has passed. The Smurfette Jane Doe remains frozen in time, an example of just how easily a vulnerable girl can slip through every single crack in the system. Number 4, the suitcases. Gruesome murder, a cover-up, and new discoveries all coming to light now in a nearly 45-year-old cold case. 5 days before Christmas back in 1976, a young boy was playing near a bridge in Whitehaven, Pennsylvania. The snow covered the landscape, which is why when he looked down he noticed 3 black dots that caught his eye. These were suitcases that had apparently been tossed from 300 feet above, and 2 of them had landed in the woods. One made it to the riverbank. The boy really wanted to know what was inside them. He told his parents about the find, who in turn told the police. And when they opened them, they found body parts. human flesh wrapped in a waterlogged bedspread and pieces of old newspaper. The New York Sunday edition from September, in fact. And there was a severed torso, legs, a head, and something else. A full-term fetus of a baby girl who never got to take a breath. Now something like this doesn't scream random act of violence. No, this was rage, revenge, and probably a bit of both. The mother's nose, breasts, and ears had been sliced clean off, and those were never recovered. She'd been strangled, and that's how she died. But after that, the killer shot her in the neck just to make sure. The body was then cut with a serrated blade, deliberate but not surgical, and clean enough to suggest experience but not enough to suggest control. She was young, they figured out that much, maybe 16 to 20 years old. About 5 feet tall. She weighed around 145 pounds, maybe a bit more because of the pregnancy. She had dark brown hair and 2 moles on her face, one above her eye, the other on her cheek. But no one knew who she was. They fingerprinted her, but she wasn't in the system. Then they checked dental records across the US and Canada. Still nothing showed up. And so she became Jane Doe. Eventually they named her Beth Doe. With no leads coming in, eventually her body was buried in '83. Unclaimed, it was all but forgotten until the case was reopened in 2007. That year her remains were exhumed and isotope testing was done on her bones and hair. For years investigators believed she might have come from Central Europe, maybe Croatia or Serbia, and immigrated to the US as a child. That turned out to be wrong. She was from the US, but no one could say why she hadn't been reported missing or why no one had come looking. Over the years police chased dozens of leads. One woman thought Beth Doe might be her childhood friend Maggie Cruz, who had vanished in the '70s after running away from foster care in Massachusetts. The timelines matched, but Maggie Cruz was found alive. It would take another several years, but finally in 2021 science and luck intervened. A man named Lewis Collin Jr. had submitted his DNA to a public database looking to get some background on his family and where he'd come from. And that DNA matched the sample the authorities had pulled off Beth Doe in 2016. Suddenly, this wasn't such a mystery anymore. Beth Doe was 15-year-old Evelyn Collin from Jersey City, New Jersey. And Lewis was her nephew who had been born 7 years after she vanished. Evelyn was a teenager in love back then, and so her parents reluctantly allowed her to move in with her 19-year-old boyfriend, Louis Sierra. And he'd been their next-door neighbor, someone they thought they knew. But shortly after Evelyn moved in, something shifted. She called her mom one day saying she didn't feel well and asked for soup. But by the time her mother arrived, the apartment was completely empty. The neighbor said Evelyn and Louis had just moved out for good, up and vanished. Weeks later, Evelyn's family got a letter. It was in Spanish, postmarked from Connecticut. Louis wrote that Evelyn had given birth to a baby boy, not a girl, and that she was fine. No need to worry. So they believed she was okay. Though, after not hearing from her at all after that, when they finally tried to report her missing, police wouldn't file the report because of that letter. And by the time Evelyn was identified, both of her parents were dead. They'd gone to their graves never knowing what actually happened to their daughter. On March 31st of 2021, Louis Sierra was arrested. He was 63 years old and living a normal life in Ozone Park, New York. They charged him with Evelyn's murder and extradited him back to Pennsylvania. And for a brief moment it looked like justice was coming. However, in January of 2025, the charges were dropped. And not because they got the wrong guy, but because authorities determined Evelyn had likely been killed in New Jersey, not Pennsylvania. And the case was out of the state's jurisdiction. I did not like him, and I'll never forget his eyes. No soul. No soul. He watched her every minute of every day. Over 40 years of waiting, DNA, forensics, public pleas, and in the end, the justice system shrugged. Today, Evelyn Retz, under her real name, her case is still open, still waiting for another courtroom and another prosecutor, another shot at justice. And Louis Sierra? Well, he's currently walking around a free man. Number 3, Arroyo Grande. It was October 5th, 1980, and Henderson, Nevada was still mostly dust, desert, and dirt roads. Just south of State Route 146, 2 brothers, one of them an off-duty cop, were driving along a remote path when they spotted what looked like a mannequin. They rolled up and got a closer look, and that's when they could clearly see it was not made of plastic. This was a young woman, nude, lying face down, posed, and she had been killed less than 24 hours earlier. Multiple wounds to the back of the head suggested blunt force trauma that looked like it had been inflicted with some sort of hammer. Her face had been battered severely, one tooth knocked out clean, and then there were also 7 deep stab wounds in her upper back, believed to have come from a 2-pronged weapon, the kind meant to puncture, not to kill quickly. And near her body lay a scrap of orange-yellow plastic, like a piece of a shower curtain. And her skin had been washed, like someone had tried to clean her up before laying her gently on that ground. The scene was gruesome, but also strange. I mean, someone had taken time and care enough to pose her rubber skin down while also being violent enough to make sure she wasn't immediately recognizable. But there was one thing they missed. On the inside of her right forearm, crudely inked in blue, was a small, shaky-looking letter S, an amateur tattoo that was fresh, possibly made days or even just hours before she died. This girl was small, only about 5 feet 2 inches, weighing 100 pounds. She had long, natural strawberry blonde hair and pierced ears, silver-painted fingernails, and bright hazel eyes. Her dental work showed she had a rare suture procedure done on her teeth, something only a handful of orthodontists would perform back in the 70s. But other than that, who she really was, nobody knew, though the people who found her refused to forget her. And she was buried under a headstone that read, Jane Arroyo Grande Doe. The police officer who discovered her donated money for her burial, and he and his wife visited her grave regularly, leaving flowers for a girl whose name they never knew. Investigators tried everything, and her body was exhumed 4 different times over the years as new tips and technology surfaced. At least 20 missing women were ruled out through DNA testing. In 2019, investigators partnered with Estrella Forensics and Barbara Ray Venter, the same genetic genealogist who helped crack the case of the Golden State Killer. Using DNA pulled from preserved hair samples, they created a full genetic profile and uploaded it to GeneMatch. And in December of 2021, 41 years after her death, the Henderson Police Department made the announcement that their Jane Doe had a name. She was Tammy Terrell. 17-year-old Tammy was from Roswell, New Mexico, and had last been seen on September 28, 1980. Her sister had dropped her off at the Eastern New Mexico State Fair. She never came home. That night she was reportedly spotted at a local restaurant, the white man and another woman. According to tips that came in later, she may have been planning to hitch a ride to California. But somewhere between Roswell and the West Coast, Tammy was murdered. Now, who were the man and woman she was seen with that night? I mean, were they grooming her, kidnapping her? Did she go willingly? And did they put that S tattoo on her? And if so, why? The weapon used to stab Tammy was unlike anything police had seen before. A 2-pronged tool with 3-inch prongs. Something industrial, maybe even improvised. It wasn't a random knife from the kitchen. This was brought to the scene and chosen for a specific reason, which means somebody planned this. Still though, as of today, her killer has never been caught. Number 2, The Road to Nowhere. November 1st, 1980. Truck driver headed down Interstate 45, passing through the dense woods of Sam Houston National Forest, just north of Huntsville, Texas. Spots what looks like roadkill, but as he got closer, he saw the unmistakable shape of a human body, face down in the grass, just 20 feet off the shoulder. He pulled over, and what he found would launch one of Texas' most disturbing cold cases. The girl was young, somewhere between 14 to 18, nude, beaten, and clearly dead. Her lips were swollen, her right eyelid was blackened, and there was a human bite mark on her right shoulder. Around her neck was a necklace with a smoky glass stone and a rectangular pendant. Her toenails were painted pink. That necklace was the only personal item left behind. Her clothes were missing except for a pair of red leather high-heeled sandals with light brown straps found nearby. Interestingly, the medical examiner said she'd only been dead for about 6 hours, meaning she was killed sometime around 3:20 a.m. The cause of death was ligature strangulation, but that wasn't the worst of it. She had been assayed violently by a large blunt object. Her underwear and fragments of pantyhose had been stuffed into her after that, possibly to stem bleeding while she was transported. There was no DNA from her assailant whatsoever, so it's unclear the true extent of what she endured. And then there was that bite mark, a detail that along with everything else had some experts saying her killer may have been female. The victim had hazel eyes, light brown hair with a reddish tint, and a small scar that sat above her right eyebrow. But no missing persons report matched her. None of the Texas yearbooks turned up a face. When police canvassed the nearby Ellis Prison Farm, where she'd apparently been headed the night before, no inmates or guards could identify her. Still, though, there were sightings. A day earlier on Halloween night, a girl matching her description showed up at a Gulf gas station asking for directions to the prison. She stepped out of a 1973 or 74 light-top Chevy Capri driven by a white male. Later that same night, she stopped at a nearby truck stop, the hitching post, again asking for directions to the Ellis unit. A waitress there said the girl claimed she was from Rockport or Aranas Pass. When the waitress pushed about her age because she looked young, the girl reportedly shrugged and said, "Who cares? That was the last time anyone saw her alive." She was buried being known only as Walker County Jane Doe. Over the years, forensic artists created multiple reconstructions. Her body was exhumed in 1999 for DNA, and still the case went cold. Until 2015 when Walker County reopened it. And in 2020, with the help of Othram Incorporated, investigators used genetic genealogy to extract DNA from preserved tissue. Family. Her name was Sherry Jarvis, and she was just 14 years old. Sherry was born in Forest Lake, Minnesota in 1966, and she'd been taken into state custody at age 13 due to missing too much school, and ran away shortly after her 14th birthday. The last her family heard from her was a letter from Denver in August of 1980. She was frustrated and wanted to come home, but she never made it. When the sheriff's office formally announced her identity in November of 2021, her family released a statement thanking everybody who had cared for her grave and pursued the case. The scary reality is that Sherry's killer is still out there. Journalist Michael Hargraves pointed out the absence of semen in the presence of object penetration, not typical of male offenders. The bite mark on her shoulder also seemed odd if it were a male attacker who would more likely target intimate areas. So he thinks it may have been a woman who did this. Then again, maybe it was the work of a serial killer. She's not the only girl who died this way in 1980. 3 other women, all found near I-45, were strangled and some were assaulted. One of those women, known only as Orange Socks, though later identified as Deborah Jackson, had her case falsely linked to Henry Lee Lucas, a man with a long history of lying to police. Lucas was once floated as a suspect in Sherry's murder too, but the bite mark didn't match and no concrete link was ever found. The sheriff's office says the identification of Sherry has generated new leads, but no arrests have ever been made. That means the killer or killers walked away in 1980 and have never been held accountable for their crimes. Number 1, the girl without a face. They called her Precious Hope, a name given not because anyone knew who she was, but because they didn't and someone needed to care. It was February 28, 1983 in a forgotten part of St. Louis, Missouri, a rundown red brick apartment complex on Clemens Avenue, abandoned, broken, and long past hope. The 2 boys were poking around the basement looking for some spare parts for a go-kart. Instead, they found something that would forever etch that address into the city's darkest lore. Lying on her stomach, stripped naked except for a yellow sweater, was the headless body of a little girl. Her hands were bound behind her back with red and white nylon cord. There was no blood at the scene, no splatter or stains, just a poor little kid's body. And whoever left her there didn't kill her there. They brought her to that basement after they were done with her, hoping that she'd never be found. And what was done to her was beyond horrific. At first, police thought they might be looking at a young adult woman, maybe a drug user or a lady of the night. That assumption evaporated once they realized they were dealing with a child when the autopsy showed she was somewhere between 8 and 11 years old. And just a child who had been strangled and whose head had been removed with a single, clean cut, likely by a large carving knife. That head has never been found. Even her stomach was empty, indicating she hadn't eaten in at least 24 hours. There was nothing left to identify her, and no one came forward looking for her. The authorities collected what they could, of course, fingerprints, footprints, and DNA, but in 1983 that meant little. She had no scars or dental records, and her face, her one true identifying feature, was gone. Without it, there could be no composite sketch, no image to show on the news. She was just a file with no name. They buried her in December that year in Washington Park Cemetery in a tiny casket. They gave her a name, Hope, because that's all they could do. Hope her killer would confess and hope she was at peace. The yellow sweater she wore, the only article of clothing left on her body, was actually sent to a psychic in Florida in a desperate attempt to gain any sort of insight. That psychic never returned it, claimed it was lost in the mail. So one of the few pieces of potential evidence in one of the city's most brutal child murders vanished because someone mailed it to a psychic. Over the years, several missing girls were considered as possible matches, but all were ruled out one by one. Authorities even looked into whether the girl might have been a victim of Vernon Brown, a local pedophile and murderer. Brown was executed in 2005, but never admitted to killing her, despite investigators' repeated attempts to tie him to the case. For decades, the grave sat undisturbed, but in 2013, investigators decided it was time to try again. The case had haunted detectives, so maybe modern science could do what 1980s forensics couldn't. But get this, they couldn't find her body. Due to poor cemetery records and frankly negligence, Hope's remains had been misplaced. It took months, camera calibration technology, and comparing burial day photos to even locate her casket. Thankfully, though, eventually they did. From her bones, researchers were able to conduct isotope analysis, tracing minerals to determine where she might have lived. According to the results, she had likely spent her life in the southeastern United States, places like Georgia, Mississippi, or the Carolinas. Yet oddly, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children listed possible origins in the Midwest, states like Ohio or Pennsylvania. Even science couldn't agree on where she was from. After the exhumation, she was finally laid to rest once more, and this time at Calvary Cemetery, in a section called the Garden of Innocence, a space reserved for children no one ever claimed. And that's tragedy, isn't it? Not just violence and cruelty, but the fact that this little girl lived and died without a name, without history, and without anyone asking where she'd gone. So there were 5 haunting Jane Doe mysterious. And that's a wrap on today's episode. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later.